Good evening and welcome to Normal Ireland Live. My name is Curtis Daly and I will be your host this evening. And I'm joined by our very special guest, Damien Willey, aka KernowDamo. We certainly have a crossover audience. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem, mate. Glad to be here. Nice to come over on someone else's channel and stir stuff up.
We like to do that, we certainly do. And I tell you what, it's absolutely scandalous that we haven't done anything together before, but we are righting wrongs here. Now, let's get on to the first story of the night. Now, Navarra and Stats for Lefties commissioned a poll for Islington North, and the results so far show that Labour are significantly ahead of Jeremy Corbyn. As you can see, Labour are on 43%, and that is a huge drop of 21 points, with Jeremy's second place with 29%. Now, look, for an independent, that is hugely impressive. However, this is Jeremy Corbyn. You know, he's got better name recognition. He's well known by his constituency. So in terms of winning the seat, I mean, this doesn't look quite as easy as many predicted. Now, there is another poll which shows a head-to-head matchup between Jeremy Corbyn and Labour, which puts Corbyn on 55% to Labour's 45%. Now, Damien, I mean, are you shocked by this poll? I mean, did you think it would be closer, or even maybe thought Jeremy would have been ahead? Or do you think maybe the poll estimates him? I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
I would have hoped in my heart of hearts that it would have been a little bit closer than that. Well, a little bit closer than that. Jeremy would have been a little bit more ahead than he is, but it actually doesn't surprise me altogether because Jeremy is Labour. He is associated with Labour. He has been Labour since he was 16 years of age, and he's now in his 70s, a heck of a long time. And now he's been expelled from it. He did wait for the last minute to announce that candidacy. I do think that if he had gone for a little bit earlier, he would have had a bit more time to build up the fact that he is not the Labour candidate anymore, that he is an independent now. He is running as an independent, and it's got to be that recognition now within Islington North that he is no longer Labour, and it's separating him from the Labour Party in so many minds. I mean, it's so easy for us on social media and doing what we do that we can, you know, we're reading stories all the time. We're familiar to a level of politics that is probably sickening for an awful lot of people, but we like it. And with Jeremy's case, really, in Jeremy's case, it is getting that separation from the Labour Party now when he's been associated it for so long. For so many people who are not as familiar with politics as you and I are, so many people who are watching the show are, who enjoy other social media and spend time moving in political circles, they don't realise he's not Labour anymore. And that might seem crazy to some of people who are into this and who are following the story quite a lot and who have been, you know, brought into politics or encouraged into it and enthused and inspired by people like Jeremy. But for a lot of people, that's not the case. And realizing that there's one time every 5 years when everybody suddenly has to take some interest in politics, it's not necessarily happening in that regards. So it's very much a boots on the ground, getting people out, backing Jeremy, campaigning, door knocking, doing the long yards that Labour are not got now because they've driven so much of their campaign support away. But it's having those conversations with people on doorsteps and making them realise that actually he is no longer standing for Labour. He is this independent candidate now. The fact he is so high in the polls is testament to him and his own name recognition. Most independents cannot get that kind of recognition. They don't have a party machine behind them. They don't have that kind of financing behind them. They don't have that political push behind them. But Jeremy pulls it in wherever he goes. This is a guy who gets stopped in the street. This is a guy who kids like to have photographs taken with, not bored to death by anecdotes that they think might be funny, like a certain Brill Cream de Boerfest recently tried. But it's coming together. It's whether there's enough time and whether enough people are still prepared to get out there for Jeremy and help him have these conversations. I think it is going to continue to tighten. And the other graph is interesting as well, because that one indicates what would happen if things were a two-horse race in Islington North. Whether it was just Labour's private healthcare CEO, Praful Nargand, and his private health clinics, versus Jeremy, Jeremy would walk it, because Jeremy is infinitely more popular than both the Labour Party is itself reputationally and Starmer, because nobody knows who Nargin is, let's be honest.
I mean, Jeremy's personal ratings are really, really high. And I think it's important to note that, look, as a person, what he represents is more popular than what the Labour Party are offering. I know that opponents to Jeremy Corbyn will use this to say, oh, he's not very popular. But look, it's not down to whether they endorse him or not. And I was down in Islington, and there were people who obviously know who Jeremy is, but as you said, hadn't realised that he wasn't the Labour candidate. Now, we actually have a clip of that from Sunday.
What do you think that Jeremy Corbyn is standing as an independent?
That's news.
It's news.
Yeah, I didn't realise he was doing that. Because he's always been Labour. And I know he's been in the borough for 30 odd years. So as an independent, that would be quite interesting.
So he was obviously the Labour Party MP for the constituency, but he had the whip removed by Keir Starmer last year. And then at the general election, when it was announced by Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Corbyn said that I'm going to stand as an independent against the Labour candidate. So the fact that that's news to you is something, but is that something you're interested in voting for?
Yes, because we might as well have a change. So if an independent party kind of fulfills most of the needs of the local community, then why not vote them in and give them a chance?
What's your general opinion of Jeremy Corbyn?
I know he's very much for the people, what with his local, when he has his monthly, when people can go with any issues and what have you, he's very dedicated to how people, trying to help them and trying to support them. So the fact that he's now decided to be an independent, well, it's news, but it wouldn't surprise me. But, yeah.
What's your thoughts of Keir Starmer?
Oh, gosh.
You can say what you like.
When certain people in governance, as they are, they don't listen to what people want, or even to local communities. So they kind of yes, they've got the votes on the basis of what they've said, but not truly followed through. So yeah, that's my opinion on that one, and I'll leave it like that.
So that person there, I mean, she wasn't the only one. Now, the talk from inside the Corbyn campaign has been that issue, that so many people are assuming he is the Labour candidate. But I've also heard that people have voted Labour by post thinking it's Jeremy and later found out it wasn't. Damien, I mean, I think you've already expressed your worry about that already. I mean, do you think that so many votes by post have been lost due to those thinking that Jeremy is the candidate? And does that make it too much of an uphill battle now that maybe it can't be done? Or do you think, the last week of the election is the most significant part?
She was lovely, wasn't she? She was ever so polite.
She was.
I'm not sure I would have been. She was very careful with her words. I like that. Anyway, the postal vote. Well, this plays into the issue itself with Jeremy having. I really wish he had announced he was running earlier as an independent. I feel surely he must have known that he was not going to be allowed back into the Labour Party under Keir Starmer. At least the lady there knew who he was. I dare say you take some joy out of that. But it's just that little bit too little too late, unfortunately. And those votes will be lost votes for people who voted Labour believing that they were voting for Jeremy and then realising afterwards he's not. And the same thing could happen at the polling stations next week if people are looking at their ballot form and they're looking for Labour because they associate that with Corbyn. Instead, they've got to look for Corbyn, Jeremy, independent. I believe it's the second box down on the sheet, or will be. So you should see that well before the Labour candidate anyway. But it's getting people to look for Corbyn's name and not looking for Labour. And as that lady perfectly was a perfect example of, there are people in that seat who know Jeremy, who love Jeremy, who think highly of him, but they do not realise he is no longer the Labour candidate. And as incredulous as so many of us could still find that is the case. And unfortunately, if those votes have been lost via the postal votes, I'm sure some have. I hope it's not too many. I hope it's something that can be overcome on the doorstep with those conversations, still going to be going on over the next week, as people need to get out and volunteer for this last 7 days to really push for it, get the vote out, get people out and get them knowing that they should not be voting Labour if they want to vote for Corbyn. And that really is all there is to it, really.
Obviously, we don't want this to happen, but if he were to lose, what do you think the ramifications would be? You know, of course, the centrists and the right will hail this as a nail in the coffin for socialist politics. And they do have the narrative there. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn lost 2 general elections. He then goes on to lose his own seat and Starmer wins a huge majority, right? If that's the scenario, it does seem like that we have a big battle on our hands for the left.
Labour are going to win this anyway. They're going to win because the Tories are toast. They've had it. And there is a strong part of me, if it wasn't for the fact I think Reform will take up so many of their support base, I would really hope this was Tory extinction level stuff. But with regards to where Labour goes, if he gets this massive majority and Jeremy loses his seat, yes, there will be people gloating about it. I can imagine Peter Mandelson will be popping the champagne corks with whatever billionaire he wants to swan around with now, and Wes Streeting will have a strong ally in Praful Nargan to privatise the NHS, as he seems insistent on doing. And this is a guy who, let's not forget, used to praise the NHS up one side and down the other when it helped him when he was fighting cancer, yet he's going to destroy it and sell it off to privateers and bring private investment and private interests into the NHS even more, which is precisely what's been destroying it and where so much of the funding into the NHS has actually been lost and gone to. You've got to remember, whenever the Tories talk about record funding going into the NHS and we're putting all this money in his record levels of funding, so much of it, because so much has been outsourced, the reforms the Tories have brought in, so much of the money going into what we think is the NHS is actually going to line private shareholder pockets for these outsourcing companies that have taken vast swathes of health contracts. So much of the money that is being sunk into the NHS is being lost to line the pockets of the wealthy. But do you hear Starmer talking about a wealth tax, for example, if they get into power? No, because he doesn't think it's necessary. Or Rachel Reeves doesn't think it's necessary. But it is. And it's the amount of money that could be raised is silly. And in large part, this is why I've gone from being Corbyn Labour to Green Party, because that wealth tax is there. The social reforms the Green Party actually stand for resonate with me. They've been there as long as Corbyn was promoting them, if not longer. And that is absolutely the direction this country still needs to go. There still needs to be a strong voice for the left. And if the Starmerites, Starmeroids, however you want to refer to them, are having a gloating time of it after the 4th of July, I don't think it'll last very long, because Starmer's going to get no honeymoon. This is a guy who is already disliked, if anybody has any semblance of what he's about at all anyway. Most people don't. About half the country, I think, polled don't have any idea of what he stands for. And let's face it, the rest of us don't either from one week to the next, because it depends what direction the wind is blowing as to what he believes in for this week or another. He stood for election on 10 pledges that all got binned after all. The guy can say what he likes, say what he'll do, write a 136-page manifesto all he likes. Nobody should take any notice of what's written in it. Nobody should take any notice of what he says. The only thing that's going to matter is what he does once he's in power, and he needs to be held to account for that. And of course, there'll be people like us who will remind him of what he said previously versus what he does then, and hold him to that. And he doesn't like that very much, as we've seen in a couple of interviews where somebody has actually held him to account, which doesn't happen very often. There was a lovely young lady in Swindon the other day, I believe, who was talking to him about the Bibby Stockholm and whether he'd get rid of that or not, the prison barge off the coast of Dorset. And he really didn't have it. 6 times he said he wouldn't bring in more boats, but not once could he bring himself to say he would do away with that barge. Braverman's
he really isn't a very good political operator. He has no charisma, and he really does take it personally when people challenge him. He's not very good at it. I mean, you remember the first was it the Sky head-to-head debate, and everybody laughed when he said his dad was a toolmaker, and he told them off like a teacher. He said, "That's not very funny. We're laughing at him because he keeps bringing it up." And I think you're correct when Starmoroids or the agrocentrists will celebrate whenever the left loses, but that celebration won't last for very long, especially when it comes to 2-3 years in, and you've got Labour enacting austerity just like the Tories, and the NHS isn't getting any better, and actually the privatisation is increasing. Maybe they might turn around and realise actually it's policy that matters, not vibes. But we will move on to our second story. And I know you brought up the Tory party, and that's what we will be focused on right now. A fifth member of the Tory party has been suspected of betting on the election date. Russell George was the fifth Conservative unveiled as facing inquiries by the Gambling Commission. It comes on the same day the Conservatives withdrew their support for 2 general election candidates, including Mr. George's colleague, Craig Williams. Mr. George, whose seat is Montgomeryshire, said he will cooperate fully with the Commission and has stepped back from the Senate's Conservative front bench. BBC Newsnight has learned up to 15 Conservative candidates and officials are being looked at by the Gambling Commission over alleged betting on the timing of the general election. It is understood the regulator will be carrying out interviews this week. Damien, I mean, this must be the worst Tory campaign in history. I mean, look, we know they're not going to win. This isn't an election, it's a coronation. But despite that, we've had Rishi Sunak announce the election when it was pissing it down. He left D-Day early, and we have an ongoing betting scandal. And you can't say that Sunak is unlucky, because all of these things are his own doing. So I'd like to ask you, maybe to speculate, maybe Sunak knows about the betting scandal and allowed his mates to make money off there, because he was the one that announced the election day. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, he did end up looking a bit like a drowned rat that day, didn't he? There's these rat connotations with Rishi Sunak. They don't help him at all, really, do they? And I'm sure people watching know exactly what I'm talking about, but I won't say the word on here. Yeah, it's not going well for him at all. It doesn't help that he surrounds himself with people as inept and clueless as he himself is. He is a guy that has been brought up and raised in a bubble, educated in a bubble, has surrounded himself with very wealthy people and become very wealthy himself, not least of which one that he happened to marry. And he lives in a world way, way beyond the rest of us. He has not the slightest idea what life for ordinary people is like, not one iota. His campaign is just incredulous as a result of it, because these are people that don't really realise the impacts of 14 years of Tory austerity and hell, frankly, have wrought on the country. They don't know what it's like to work or walk a single day in an ordinary working class person's life. I'm an unpaid carer for 2 disabled people here at home. I run my channel around what I do looking after them. That's always been the case. And we regard the last 14 years as having been a survival, because anybody who's got disabled relatives or anybody that's tried to get extra help from the state when you have additional needs, it's just become the most horrific Hunger Games-esque kind of farce ever. And I can completely understand a lot of the hatred that is turned on the Tories, because they deserve every last bit of it. And I don't believe that Sunak was ignorant necessarily of what was going on here. He said when he became leader that he was going to preside over a party that was going to be more transparent and more open and more honest. And he's been anything but. If anything, he's been as bad, if not worse, some things were under Johnson, because it's just one scandal after another, from Dominic Raab bullying to now where we've got this gambling issue. It's and 5 of them now. I mean, I was aware of 2 last time I looked at this. And I'm not aware of the 2. The aide that put a bet on that he knew what the date of the election was going to be, when he's actually one of Sunak's own aides, and he was running for, I think that was a Welsh seat as well. And then there's this other woman in North Bristol whose partner, I believe, works for the Conservative Party and could possibly have told her when the election might have been as well. It's just crazy, and it's happening again and again. And not to divert away from the Tories, particularly because I just want to boot Starmer and drag Labour into this, but Labour also have their own gambling scandal. I don't know if you want to comment on that before I go any further, but
I mean, we will actually get onto that as well. But I'm actually quite surprised that politicians betting on politics isn't actually banned. I mean, footballers aren't allowed to bet on football. I mean, the Scotland Secretary, Alistair Jack, I mean, he put 3 bets on the election being held on the 4th of July. I mean, there's no way that isn't coordinated. Now, we know trust is at an all-time low for politicians, but surely this is only going to make things far worse.
Well, Jack was a minister after all. Surely he had some idea. But then we have been told that Sunak didn't discuss his plans to call the election now with anybody. But how much truth is in that? We're only taking the word of a Tory MP or one of those infamous anonymous Conservative sources. Because frankly, if you trust in the word of a Conservative, you haven't been paying attention to the last 14 years or more, really. No, he's lost complete control of any. Well, I don't think he was in any real control with his party whatsoever. But it's just crazy the level of depravity and craziness that seems to be gotten away with. They thought they would get away with this. They thought nobody would notice. They thought there would be no censure coming their way if they did. It's like you said, footballers doing this, or a boxer taking a dive in the 3rd round for vested interest because he's been paid off to do it. This is very much what it looks like, what it sounds like. And it is crazy that there aren't these restrictions on what government officials, what ministers or their aides can do, but there aren't. And frankly, until something like this ends up happening, until it ends up turning into a scandal, such as the repetitive dishonesty in our politics, no matter who seems to be in power, you end up having these situations where, oh dear, this is awful, this will never happen again, we'll promise to fix this, and then it either genuinely does get fixed because they got caught, or it just gets shuffled away under the back pages of the newspapers somewhere. The journalists and the mainstream media and their stenographers in the media will just carry on and do what they do and just help them out. And
I mean, when you look at this from the outside in, you think, how can this be such a calamitous campaign? How can these scandals happen? And I guess to touch upon what you said earlier, maybe because someone like Rishi Sunak is born in a bubble. He's a super wealthy guy. I mean, he's born into a, probably more than middle class background, I'd say. Yeah, probably pretty well to do. And that's the thing. You don't see the real world. And I guess that clearly has an implication on your political decisions, that maybe something like this is all this sort of boys club, this inside stuff, it's dodgy, whatever, doesn't matter until it comes out and they think, wow, because they're not in the real world. And I guess potentially that plays a part in all of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, his background wasn't the background of the super rich. He wasn't exactly born with that silver spoon in his mouth. I think his parents were a doctor and a pharmacist, weren't they? But they got him. They did well enough. They could send him to private school, and that's where the rot happens. Essentially,
that is exactly. Yeah.
They breed a certain type of person. It doesn't matter which one it is. You can look at all the Conservatives. You can look at so many on the Labour benches as well in this day and age as well, and they all seem to have this same innate, I have a right to do this, I'm the superiority complex, I guess. And certainly as somebody from the working class, I'm not the son of a doctor and a pharmacist, I'm the son of a postman and a cleaner. We look at this completely differently. We're raised completely differently. Where he was clearly comfortable in his upbringing, he's a couple of years younger than I am, I think. My earliest memories were, certainly both of us grew up through Thatcher, for example. His parents would not have had any issues as a pharmacist and a doctor being brought up through the Thatcher years, for example. But me, and one of my earliest memories is hiding behind the sofa because the milkman was knocking on the door. We didn't have any money for him. So it was quick, hide behind the sofa, turn the TV off, and hope he goes away in a minute. That's what I can remember. That's what I remember growing up. And I struggle to understand if somebody like him, who other Conservatives even, or around about my age or younger, who would have grown up through that sort of experience too, surely, or did they not? Because were they shielded from it by virtue of their backgrounds and they were more comfortably off? But it ends up, however the upbringing side of it goes, you end up in this private elitist sort of education system, and it spits these people out, and they really do not realize that the world does not exist as they were taught through the worldview of Harrow or Winchester or Eton or wherever else they went.
I guess there's a sort of a catch-22 with that, because majority of them, yes, are in the bubble. They go through private school, and you can see exactly where they get their worldview and politics from. And there is a smaller minority of conservatives, or at least conservative supporters, who grew up working class, and you say, how do they turn out like that? How did they become selfish in their politics? And I guess it's that sort of idea that they got themselves out of poverty, even though that's not the case. There's so many different factors of it, but they believe that. And in a way, they then use that against the working class by saying, well, if I can do it, somebody else can do it. And that's actually quite a pervasive attitude. It's why it's not always, I mean, these days, it's not always guaranteed that the working class vote goes towards the left. It's something that's quite hard for us to try and communicate to those who say, the Tories and the right-wing parties are not your friends, even though they cosplay as those that, care about the working class, but also sort of offer prosperity for the working class. But we move on now. Let's go to some of our comments. Jacqueline, hello again. This is a lesson to people to be careful when reading down their ballot paper. So I've seen the ballot paper because people have posted their postal votes online, and Jeremy Corbyn is second. It is Jay Corbyn. But even still, what worries me is that despite him being second, there's a lot of people who are just going to look for Labour. And I noticed that a lot of independents don't have a logo next to their political party. So you've got, Labour, then you've got the Labour logo, Conservative Party, you've got the tree, whatever. A lot of independents just have it blank. So there is that danger there. But if, at the end of the day, we can't help that. People are going to do what they got to do. We just try and got to get the information out there. Let's go to another comment. Stanley Beckett. With the number of lobbyists standing for Labour and the corporate donors and management consultants in the Labour circle, I expect it to be a slee under Starmer as under Johnson, Truss and Sunak. I mean, I don't see, you're absolutely right, because the fundamentals aren't going to change under Keir Starmer. In fact, there's a lot of lobbying in the party. We know that, it's well documented. We've covered it. Damo's covered it. And actually, one of our stories is going to tap into that. Any more comments? Sunak must be, excuse me, Sunak must seriously dislike being PM because he seems to be self-sabotaging all over the place. I was actually going to ask you, Damo. I mean, did Rishi Sunak give up before even the election was called? Do you think he actually wants to do this?
I genuinely don't think he has. I genuinely just think he's this bad at campaigning, this clueless. He just doesn't really know how badly he's doing. I genuinely think he's been shielded. He's been insulated. It would be nice. It'd be a novelty if he came out afterwards and said, "Yeah, I threw it in the bin. I put a bet on it." But I don't know. I don't see it. I think he genuinely thinks he's doing a great job, and of course, he doesn't talk to any ordinary people. I'm reminded actually of that little bit of footage of him as a kid when he spoke about who he hangs out with and his friends, and I didn't have any working class ones. So actually, I mean, I believe that was before he went even to Winchester. So, there must have been something else in his upbringing as well to make him the way he's turned out. But nah, he doesn't have a clue. He doesn't have a Scooby. I would love it to think he would be self-sabotaging for a bet, though.
I think it makes it funnier to me that he thinks he's doing a good job. I find that funnier because it just makes him more of a ridiculous person.
Yeah, I truly do think he thinks he's done a great job and can't understand why nobody likes him. And it's just purely because he lives on a different planet. I'm sure.
I agree. Do we have any more comments? Edward Sexby, hello again. Damon, please, as a fellow Cornishman, make Curtis pronounce it properly. Kernow, cheers.
Kernow. I'll get you told. And my surname's Willey, by the way, not Wiley.
Apologise.
I'm let it go, but since somebody else brought it up, I mean, who am I to not respond appropriately?
I also have to apologise because I'm from Bristol. Now, of course, I'm not Cornish or anything, but we're known for our farmer's accent. We're closer down that area, so I'm letting Bristol down. It seems I've been away for too long. So thank you. Appreciate you holding me to account.
Nothing wrong with that. Cody and Brogue.
Now, Turn Left is still completely voluntary. We have multiple people working on these shows, working hard in their spare time to bring this content to you. So we'd Would really appreciate that you subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you share our content. And if you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month. The goal is to become a fully funded media organisation where people can dedicate their time to turn left with a wage. We also have a message from a very special person.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.
I think you should listen to Jeremy. But let's move on. Now, staying with the betting scandal, but this time it's the Labour Party. Now, of course, Labour have enjoyed the Tory catastrophe. The betting scandal has obviously given them ammunition, but it turns out that they're also doing it too. Labour has suspended one of its general election candidates after the party was drawn into the controversy surrounding betting and the general election. Kevin Craig, Labour Central Suffolk and North Ipswich candidate, was administratively suspended after Labour was told by the Gambling Commission that an investigation had been launched into one of the party's candidates. Apologising for what he described as a huge mistake, Craig admitted in a statement that he had placed a bet against himself winning the seat a few weeks ago. Craig said in a statement, "Throughout my life, I have enjoyed the odd bet for fun, whether on politics or horses. A few weeks ago, when I thought I would never win this seat, I put a bet on the Tories to win here with the intention of giving any winnings to local charity. While I did not place this bet with any prior knowledge of the outcome, this was a huge mistake for which I apologise unreservedly." I mean, I have to say, it's pretty embarrassing to be caught out on betting against yourself. I mean, it's truly, truly pathetic stuff. But it gets worse. Craig is the founder and chief executive of the communications company PMLR, which describes him as an expert in political communications, crisis management, and corporate communications. It previously created a nationwide awareness campaign to promote safe gambling. The candidate had donated more than 100,000 to Labour in the past few years. A spokesperson for Labour said it would return £100,000 donated under Keir Starmer's leadership. A spokesperson for Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, said he would give back £13,000, which Craig paid for staffing costs. And Marsha D. Cordova, another Labour candidate, said she would give back £2,436 that Craig donated earlier this year. So Craig is a chief executive of a PR company. It deals with crisis management. I mean, you couldn't make the stuff up. But this isn't just some random candidate. He is very significant in Starmer's circle. He gave 100k to Starmer. He gave Wes Streeting, Marsha de Cordova money. So it's clear that Starmer put this guy in his seat, probably as a thank you for all the donations. And now Starmer's not a very good judge of character as well, but it's more than that. It's now drawn more attention to the corporate takeover of the Labour Party, a far cry of local homegrown candidates. Starmer is just putting yes men with money and seats rather than finding what he described as high quality candidates. Damien, surely this has slightly, I would say, muted Labour's attack on the Tories being a betting scandal when they're not so innocent. And also, this further exposes the internal corruption of essentially the process of trying to buy a seat in Parliament through their leadership. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've had a number of thoughts on this, Curtis. I actually put a video.
I assume you did
on this one. Dropped about a couple of hours ago now. But yes, I had a good look at this one earlier on, and I think the media are working overtime, the mainstream again, because they're making so much of this being a gambling issue. It's a gambling problem. Gambling Commission again. Tories have got people that are being investigated by the Gambling Commission. Now Labour have somebody doing a Gambling Commission. They taking the argument out of it to a certain extent or another, trying to basically water it down. But the issue with the Labour one is worse, and it's worse because of that donation. Now, that £100,000 donation was made by Kevin Craig last May, and a month later, PLMR is his PR firm, crisis management, lobbyists, essentially, is what they do. They've got a healthcare one they've taken over as well. So again, and then all that donation to Wes Streeting as well. Health Secretary wants to privatise stuff. Seems to be a little bit of a smell of that one to it as well. But anyway, lobbying firm Something like a week later, he had Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, speaking to clients of theirs about how the Labour manifesto was shaping up at that point, what Labour's ideas were for the economy at that point, how they could engage with Starmer's Labour. And then they had something like a further 7 figures. This is an article Open Democracy put out as for the 7 figures over the last year or so, leading up to February of this year, where Kevin Craig had Rachel Reeves visit Ipswich to speak to local business leaders and Labour candidates in support of the candidate for Ipswich itself, a guy called Jack Abbott, who is Labour's candidate, but he also works for PLMR as well. And so Kevin Craig had organised for Rachel Reeves to go to Ipswich to give him a bit of a boost in his seat. And it was a week later that Kevin Craig himself had been offered the neighbouring constituency. So as far as that 100 grand goes, it appears to have paid for at least 8 Labour meetings with clients of PLMR, and ultimately has led to him getting offered this seat, central Suffolk and South Ipswich. I can't remember the name of the constituency, but it's a neighbouring one to Ipswich itself. And there's huge question marks over that as to how it came to be that he was then offered this seat. But then it comes to that gambling story, because he's put money on himself to lose. Now, a boxer, I've used this analogy earlier, if a boxer threw a fight, they were putting a bet on themselves to lose. A footballer might do something similar. A politician, this is completely counterintuitive to how we think of politicians. They are the most self-serving of people, typically the ones we're used to seeing all the time, the main party politicians too often. So what on earth would anybody bet on themselves to lose for? Now, he was running in the seat that had been formerly held by Dan Poulter, who was one of the 3 Tories who had defected to Keir Starmer's Labour, one of the ones that did it most recently, attacking Sunak as he did it. But he has a majority of something like 23,000 in that seat, which might be, you would imagine, Kevin Craig is right, it's quite an insurmountable target to overcome that. But given how badly the Tories are going down, given how few seats they are actually being predicted in numerous polls to end up with after the 4th of July, this actually wasn't a seat that was beyond the realms of Labour actually taking here. But he bet himself to lose instead. So it does make me wonder whether this guy even wanted to be a politician, whether he was just in it for his fellow candidate, or whether he truly did just make a silly mistake and planned to give some money to charity. We don't know. We can't be certain. But it just seems counterintuitive for a politician to bet on themselves to lose. Surely that is a sign of somebody not wanting the job, but somebody seeing an opportunity to make some money. Because that's the only way it comes across that makes any sense here. Yes, he says he would have given it to charity. Well, yes, of course he would say something like that, you would imagine. And we're never going to know now if it was going to be true or not. But actually, I wonder whether they're still going to pay out now that because he's still on the ballot. I wonder if now he will lose, almost certainly, whether they will still pay out in the end. I just thought of that. But yeah, it's worse in my view, because there is this massive donation. He was one of Labour's top 20 donors. Top 20, that's businesses and individuals, private donors. And he's now handed the money back. But is that only because, he's caused the party some embarrassment and he's been caught?
I agree it's worse because, and I know people will say, it's the left trying to bash the Labour Party again when the Tories have done something bad. But the Tories, I mean, look, if you look at these individuals in the betting scandal, they're largely doing it out of self-interest to make themselves a bit of money. It's wrong, but we kind of expect it. But when you follow the money in politics, largely it's for a return on investment. What's going on here is internal corruption, where someone is buying access, essentially. That's a problem because these people will be deciding our laws, our policies, and essentially it's the political system being bought. That, to me, is far worse than just, a couple of people trying to just make a quick buck. They know they're going to lose and they just want to make some money. And the media, I mean, you kind of mentioned the media there. The media are not really picking up on this. I mean, they are correct to pick up on the Tories and their betting scandal. But the wider picture here is there are people inside the Labour Party who, I mean, Keir Starmer's leadership doesn't want to see local candidates that are going to serve their constituency. He's just filling these people up of corporate yes men, and some of these people are buying their way in. That says something about our entire political system, and it says the approach from the Labour Party to government. Now, of course, the media don't particularly care because this is business as usual for them. For us, this is insane. We're screaming at the rooftop saying this is a party that's called Labour. It's supposed to be the party of workers, but actually it's the party of capital. It's the party of the professional management class, and it's the party of corporate lobbyists. But the media are all in this clown car together. It's business as usual, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, this guy is he's head of this lobbying firm, this PR firm, PLMR. His clients are going to be the capitalists. They're going to be the boss class. And this is what Starmer means when he says his party is now the party of business. People say it's the party of the bosses, no longer the party of the workers. And it's true. And this is a prime example of that. And of course, the other thing I didn't mention there was that Kevin Craig was given this seat unopposed. There was no long list. There was no short list. He was literally it. He was the sole only candidate. You cannot tell me that the local Labour Party, the local CLP, did not have people there prepared to stand, did not have a candidate from amongst their own, but they're not allowed to. And of course, the Labour National Executive Committee took over the selection process last November, well before Sunak called the election. So they've already had all this in place. They weren't exactly rushing themselves to put candidates in place, even after they got that sort of executive diktat power. But it was all a rush job once Sunak sort of mentioned it. But of course, they had so many candidates in place, not least of which 6 members of the National Executive Committee themselves, basically awarding themselves safe seats, turning to each other and saying, yes, you're a good quality candidate. Yes, you're a high quality candidate as well. You can have a safe seat. Oh, good. So can you. And that was how it basically happened. You end up with people like Luke Akehurst in North Durham. You end up with people like Nigel Callascan in Barking. You end up with people like something Asser he's called in Newham. It's mad. It's absolutely crazy. And it's just people giving themselves a pat on the back, awarding rewarding each other, and you have these candidates that are not vetted, are not selected amongst the local campaigners, the local party, and yet they're just inflicted on them. And of course, Starmer, I don't know if you've heard about this one at all, Curtis. I dare say you may well have done, but where campaigners are trying to campaign for in their own constituencies, because there's now such a dearth of campaigners, with so many members having been driven away, active campaigners by Starmer's regime, that they are now doing something called twinning, and they are twinning constituencies with another. For example, I know that Sutton and Cheam has been twinned with Uxbridge and South Ruislip, where the campaigners in one seat are expected to go, if they spend something like just an email that was sent out by Ellie Reeves, if they spend 500, if they do 500 contacts in their own seat, they would be expected to do the same in 5 other twinned constituencies. So not only are they telling their members and their campaigners, you've got to volunteer, whatever you're volunteering in your own seat, you've now got to volunteer elsewhere where we tell you to go, or we're going to remove your access to content creator and organize and stop you being able to campaign in your own constituency as a punishment for not campaigning hard enough where we want you to go. So now volunteers are being punished for not campaigning hard enough. Where
this is the politics of the Labour right. They like this. They like machine politics. They don't like grassroots. They don't like activists on the ground. They want a hollowed out bottom, essentially. Not to sound strange there, but it's a top-down way of politics. It's the managers making the decisions. Essentially, that's what their plan for governance is. It's just managing things. But the idea that there is local people and activists getting involved, they despise that. And I think, people can look at the 2017 and 2019 leadership and say, oh, Jeremy Corbyn lost twice. It's the politics of Jeremy Corbyn is not popular. But you have to realised that at least with Jeremy Corbyn, there was a sort of base here which he could rely on. And actually, when I was speaking to him, he was telling me about how in 2017, when the snap election was called, they nearly ran out of money because the big donors obviously pulled out because they didn't like Jeremy Corbyn's policies of taxing the wealthy. And he put out a statement saying, we need money. And they raised £1 million straight away off ordinary people, £5-10 donations. Now, the Labour leadership and the Keir Starmer, they don't have a base here, and that also transcends to voters. Of course, they're enjoying a huge poll lead, but there's no solid foundation here. They can be elected into government, and they can lose just as quickly because these people who are propping up the Labour vote aren't solid Labour people. They're floating voters essentially, and they will move just as quickly as they come to the Labour Party.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. And as far as forming a base is concerned, I just can't see Starmer ever forming a base. He's never going to develop a base. Nobody really knows what he stands for 1 minute to the next. He's struggling financially in the same way Tony Blair is struggled financially, because they become utterly reliant on donors. Well, in that case, you end up being bought and paid for, because donors don't donate unless they're getting something out of it. They want a return on their investment. And if you're not providing that, then they will take their money and go elsewhere. What Corbyn did was absolute genius, because he paid off all the party's debts, which were historic, many decades old in some cases. And he did it all with those £5, £10 donations, because what he did was appeal to ordinary working class people, the very people the Labour Party was set up to represent. He was a rare enigma in that Labour actually stood up for them while he was leader, whereas before they hadn't done for years. And of course, under Starmer, they're anything but. They are worse than anything I've ever known.
I agree. Now, let's move on to our final story. Julian Assange has finally been released from prison after spending 5 years in Belmarsh after agreeing a plea deal. After a 14-year-long legal battle, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was released from the United Kingdom's Belmarsh prison on Monday morning after agreeing to a plea deal with the United States. Soon after, Assange boarded a flight to Australia, his home country, where his family is based. Now, I'm surprised, honestly, that he's been released. I genuinely thought he might die in prison. So this is, of course, good news. It's good news for journalism. So just initially, Damien, I want to get your thoughts on his release and his plea deal.
I'm made up for him. I'm absolutely delighted for him. And this has been an attempt from start to finish to persecute proper investigative journalism. This is the sort of journalism that we wish our journalists in this country were capable of, would bring themselves to, but they just don't seem to have either the desire nor the notion to actually challenge power and hold power to account, which is exactly what WikiLeaks was set up to do. And therefore, Julian Assange had to be taken down somehow, some way, as a result of that. And I'm not going to go into the whys and wherefores and the involvement with Keir Starmer at the Crown Prosecution Service when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, because I know he doesn't mention it often enough. But he was intrinsically involved in this persecution of Assange. I'd love to know what his reaction actually would be to this news that Assange has been released. And of course, we did not see it coming. It came out of nowhere, seemingly. We were sure the United States were just going to keep on pushing and pushing and pushing for this extradition. And in the end, he took this plea deal where he basically admitted to things, I believe is how it works out. But he won't face any further punishment because his sentence was basically what he's already served at Belmarsh. So he is, in actual fact, a free man at the end of the day. And he got on a plane. I believe he's been stung horribly for a £500,000 flight to Saipan, I believe it is, some US territory in the middle of the Indian Ocean that I hadn't heard of until this point, where he basically went before the courts and made his plea deal, and then he jetted back off to Australia, and he is very much a free man, and I'm absolutely made up for him. That
are you surprised this has happened?
Yeah, I genuinely am. I didn't see any concession coming from the US at all. Yet here it's come out of nowhere, and I don't know what prompted it or what's instigated it, or where it's come from, who's made this decision, as how high up the chain has it come. But they've decided that they're not gonna follow this. I mean, I dare say you could argue that this has gone on for so many flaming years now, that this guy's health was deteriorating drastically to the point that people have for a long time now been fearing for his health. Never mind anything, never mind justice being served. But something shifted somewhere, and I would be interested to find out where that has come from. But ultimately, the result is one I'm made up for. I completely understand him taking the deal, taking the plea, because it's got him out. He's free again. And if I'd been locked up in Belmarsh this long, I'd gone through all the hell that he's been put through. Who can blame the guy for doing that?
I mean, I very much agree. I would like to know what shifted this. I mean, I like to think I've got a pretty good grasp on a lot of things, but I will hold my hands up and tell you I have no idea what has prompted this. And I'm sure there might be more information coming out about that, which we will keep a close eye on. But the US, and you did allude to it, but the US can't help and try and stitch him up one last time by banning him from flying on a commercial plane, forcing him to use a private jet. Assange had to pay $500,000, which is £394,000, for a chartered flight from Stanford to Saipan, the capital of the Northern Mariana Islands, a US Commonwealth in the Pacific, where he will plead guilty to one count of conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defense information. So, I mean, this essentially put Assange in debt to the Australian government to the tune of $500,000. However, a crowdfunder was made for him, and it has already reached nearly £390,000, which has pretty much covered it. So, Damien, I mean, do you think the US were just being petty here by simply not putting him on the commercial flight?
I think it was very petulant. I think it was also very petulant to send him to an island in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Because that's just going to drive the cost up even more. I dare say the Assanges probably preferred an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean rather than going to the United States or anything like that, just in case things suddenly changed the minute he landed. But I'm made up about the crowdfunding. God bless crowdfunders. Where were we before they happened? You can get you anything these days, can't you, if you've got a just enough cause? And this was an absolutely just one. It's brilliant. Again, people power, people in the right, people who have an ounce of empathy in their bodies will come out and spare a little bit of cash. And it will have been tiny donations all adding up, lots and lots of them, because an awful lot of people wanted to see justice for this guy. And he's finally, in a roundabout manner, got it, and he is now free again. He can live his life now how he wants to. He needs to spend time resting and recuperating. I would not at all be surprised to see him back as a journalist at some point in the future. I just don't think he's got it in him to quit necessarily.
But I wouldn't blame him if he did quit, given the treatment.
I think he might choose not to be here if and when he decides to do that. But you know, I wish him and Stella and his family the very best, because he can actually spend time with them now. He can actually be a father to his own kids. I mean, come on. I mean, he's spent no time in their lives, barely at all. He hasn't had a chance to be. That's been robbed of him. And as a father, and that strikes a chord with me. I'm glad he's now got that opportunity to be a parent and be a family man. And take that time with his family now and go forward and do whatever he likes going forwards, because he deserves all the happiness in the world at this point. He's given this world an eye-opening that we can't trust governments, that there's so many secrets they keep from us. WikiLeaks opened an awful lot of eyes that way, in a similar way that social media is opening the eyes more and more to the politics that we talk about on a daily basis. You need these avenues, you need these platforms, and it's very hard, especially for those of us on the left, those of us who want to speak out, speak truth to power, so to speak, to be able to do that. And Julian had WikiLeaks, he had this vehicle he built up, and they came for him as a result of it. And I think, well, we might be much smaller fry in the grand scheme of things compared to Assange, but equally his story is a story that could happen to any of us if we spoke out against the wrong person in the wrong way and they took a sudden dislike to that. And I wonder, with the authoritarian streak of Keir Starmer, once he does go into government, I must confess, I have pondered to myself just how much bother might people like myself, yourself, and others in independent media might be in if he suddenly decides to take a turn against us, and where that might lead. Because frankly, I wouldn't put anything past that guy, and his involvement with Assange and his case doesn't belie my concerns on that one iota.
Well, I think it'd be it is very clear that if Keir Starmer had any power over that decision, Assange would not be released. And you're right, I do worry also about his authoritarian tendency. But this story is a win for journalism. Now, we do have a few more comments to get through very quickly. Loving this tech, the latest technology in 2024. Edward Sexby again, the gloating if Jez loses will be unbearable. I think a big effort needs to be made by anybody available in the coming week to make sure it does not happen. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I can't stand the aggro-centrists on a good day. Just imagine if this were to happen.
But like I said, they'll be gloating loudly, but not for very long. I think once reality bites for a lot of people that may have put their faith in Starmer and voted Labour to get the Tories out, they might realise they've just voted another bunch of Tories in. And that is exactly what's going to happen if you just vote Labour. Frankly, they're going to win anyway, though. So you're free. This election really is a free pass to vote for whoever you like. That's rare under our first past the post.
It is incredibly rare that actually this is the independent or green election. You can vote for these people without fear of a Tory government.
Absolutely.
Let's go to another comment. Simon Lee, Julian Assange proved there will be no more state secrets in the digital age. I mean, I would say don't put it past governments coming up with more ways to hide state secrets. I mean, just as technology develops for ordinary people, it also develops for the powerful, and they get their hands on the state-of-the-art technology before us. So, yeah, the fight is certainly not over, not in the digital age.
I would certainly also add that although WikiLeaks is very much Julian Assange's baby, WikiLeaks has grown into something bigger than just Julian. And WikiLeaks is very much still going, even if Julian does choose to sit on his laurels forever long, maybe permanently, hopefully not. But if he does, that WikiLeaks will still be going. And as you say, technology moves on, but that happens for both sides. I would like to think that state secrets and governments trying this on will soon realize it's going to become harder and harder for them to get away with it. But how about
I think that you're right. Yeah.
Pulls or shoves in, it's always going to be a bit of a tug of war with it, but it can get exposed. It has been exposed, and it will keep happening no matter how much they might try to hide stuff. Just a case of a matter of time.
Any more comments? Paul Smith, I love both these channels. Thank you so much. And
right on, Paul.
We appreciate your support. Is that all the comments for now? Or yeah. Okay. That is all for tonight. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for all of your comments and your support for this channel. Now, we'll be back this Saturday at 7:30 p.m. It's getting close, a week from tomorrow until polling day. Now, I'd like to thank Damien for coming on. You need to subscribe to his channel. It is blown up recently, and Damien has been producing brilliant content. The link to his channel will be in the description. I'm Curtis Daly. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.